Economy in Australia Trading SelMcKenzie Selzer-McKenzie. Author D.Selzer-McKenzie. National economy in Australia. Australia is an economically a very stable country. Its national economy shows thanks to a continuous growth be carried out hand negation deregulation policy within the last 20 years. And, also for the current year, it can be foreseen that higher raw material exports and a flourishing service performance sector will contribute to a healthy economic growth once more. Great Barrier Reef, Ayers Skirt, Uluru, or the Opera House in Sydney, as an aurochs leaves destination Australia has tourists a lot to offer. The state's sixth largest to its area of the Earth lies northwest of New Zealand and south of Indonesia. The total area of the country composes itself Zeitzo negation N, unite which at the same time around, whole continent extends over about 7.7 million negation N square kilometre and 3. Capital is Canberra because a planned capital between Sydney and Mel-Bourne could toward which one of them should become management negation rungssitz to himself these two cities beginning the 20th century are not a negation. Australia has approximately 22 million inwana. About 92% of this is descent European, native of Australia about 7% is Asians and 2.4% of the population is at least partial negation some descendants of the Aborigines mentioned negation. The country is urbanized strongly, more than 90% of the inwana lives in towns, because of its geographical position also, down under, mentioned. Primarily the big centres are densely populated at the southeast coast in the area of Perth and on Tasmania. On the other hand, hardly people live inside the country. Colonial beginnings. In the 16th and 17th centuries European seafarers reached the continent which little by little became cartographed primarily of Nederlandische and discoverers now. In April 1770 this one took negation Ray Captain James Cook a part of the east coast and its hinterland legendarily as colony for the British Crown into possession. It renamed the negation Sen part in New South Wales which was called New Holland before. In the subsequent years got Queensland, Victoria, Western Australia, South Australia and Tasmania then of New South Wales independent colonies exclaimed. The British Empire awarded Zwin negation the colony as the privilege the renegation sponsible government to S 1855 and 1890. London control negation had a liaison the departments of our negation foreign policy, defence and foreign trade, however, furthermore. The congregation Lonines joined together to the Commonwealth of Australia on January 1, 1901. Melbourne was exclaimed the first capital of Australia. With the undertone negation these called the Australian Federation 1907 got dominion status as almost full negation permanent independence of Gross Britain negation NEAN. However, the formal independence awarded the British Empire to the continent only in 1931 with the Statute of Westminster negation ter. The Australian Parliament recognised the independence 1942 to complete on. To this day, Australia nevertheless is not dependent. In 1999 the population voiced against the foundation of a republic so that head of state of the country is the British Queen certainly today. Economy deregulated. Within the last decades Australian politicians have increasingly deregulated and privatised the economy regulated once strictly in Australia. Australia's national economy is part of the most liberal of the world today and ranked fourth according to the Index for Economic Liberty in the year 2011. The efforts around liberal reforms reach back up to the early 1982 years. At that time Star negation head of the column the Laboratory Party with Prime Minister Bob Hawke and Chancellor of the Exchequer Paul Keane negation thing the modernisation of the Australian economy. After a serious recession took the Australian economic situation considerably to journey as of the 90s years and, since then, shows the OECD regularly one of the highest growth rates under the states. Moreover, the number dropped the unemployed submen could increasingly considerably. Australians stand the ground at the world market. In addition, Australia is integrated into the world trade closely meanwhile. The country took 19th place at the export of 21, and at the import in 2010. Because of the convincing successes these also held. grown once more considerably more weakly. However, the IMF expects ag negation M again strong GDP growth of 3.3% per negation cent for 2012. The growth of different factors is driven. Approximately the demand for house new buildings has itself positive end to negation kelt within the last weeks. The house prices as well increased. This has recovered the last very weak credit sector slightly apart from negation. The structure of the economy is dominated considerably by the service quiet branch in Australia. More than 80 per negation cent of the gross domestic product are allotted to this sector. Particular suffices negation the great finances, real estate and enterprise services are. On the other hand, this wanton negation is only about 10%. The farming contributes merely 3% to the complete economic performance of the processing trade. After all 6% of the GDP is allotted to the mining, which has a B negation indicating economic factor for Australia. Raw materials are the main export products of Australia. The country does not dispose negation substance hunger of China of many raw materials but professional of negation trolley by its strategically favourable situation in special measure of this either. The most important merchandise intended for export are gold, coal, iron ore, mineral oil and petroleum products, aluminium and agricultural products like negation wine. At hard coal is Australia B negation travels since the middle of the 80s years of the gross negation exporter of the world. Furthermore, the country has a strong steel, electrical and engineering industry and is leading wool producer worldwide. Despite high exports, the Australian current account balance is traditionally negative. This deficit swayed in the former negation reindeer between 2 and 6% of the GDP. For 2012 the IMF expects a deficit of about 4.7% of the GDP. The negation rate of unemployment was 5.2% in 2010 and took after estimates the IMF 2011 only easy on 5%. The IMF expects an negation rate of unemployment of 4.8% into the negation same year. International groups from Australian Foster Group counts to the best-known Australian undertake. The Glow Negation Bowls operating beverage company sells the known beer brand for Foster's store, proceeds in Europe also as the biggest importer for Australian wines, for example. However, negation mainly Macquarie Infrastructure Group, which is working in the infrastructure sector about the limits of Australia and operates in the USA toll motorways and port loading stations, for example, confessed a further one lower. Also these Australian Qantas Airways are worldwide a concept. The airway offers long-distance flights of the west coast of the USA or of Europe to Australian, and the 380 also uses Invest IN, Down Under. Investors can WKN with an open final certificate on the S&P/ASX 200 price index, for example, XOJ2P. Take part in the movement in the market of the Australian Stock Exchange. The index reflects the development of the course of important shares though not the dividends. Since the certificate does not have currency protection, investors thus also take part in the movement in the market of the currency pair of Euro/Australian dollar, AUD. Should casually take into account that stop them himself not only exchange risks but also the emittent risiko. In the case of an insolvency of Goldman Sachs, it can come to the dead laws.